let's shift some gears here, and we'll try and so I want to be sure that I'm not really keeping you from anything right here. I'm just
No, it's
enjoying
all
how
good. It's all
long this is
good.
going. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Uh, so let's see. So another thing that's kind of hot topic nowadays is the transgender issue and the backlash against the trans issue. Now, one thing I've observed a lot is by the so-called TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, is that the their argument against this is on the basis that it is a men's rights movement, and so there's like a lot of misandry that gets sneaked into this kind of an argument. It seems like that when we're talking about biological men and women's sports, that kind of thing. So what are your thoughts on that? Is it kind of like gynocentrism backfiring on itself, or?
Well, there's a whole complexity there. So if you look at trans issues, you look at there's trans men and there's trans women, right? And trans women have always historically anyway, have always outnumbered trans men, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Society is much more tolerant toward women's idiosyncrasies than men's. So a man who acts like a woman gets called names that are slurs and criticisms. A woman who acts like a man gets called terms of endearment. I can be a tomboy, and it does not disparage me for people to call me that. But if you're a sissy, that's disparaging. That's not cute to call you that. It's not, nobody's, he's such a sissy, isn't that funny? Like they would if I spent half my childhood in a tree, which I was allergic to, but it was a nice tree. And up there with a book reading. Like I read The Lord of the Rings in a tree. Like, where else would you read The Lord of the Rings?
Well, if you're reading a book to boot,
I'm reading, I read the whole trilogy in that tree.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, they're made out of trees, right? The books.
Right. Yeah. Surround myself with it, right? But I mean, I did stuff like that, up until the boys outpaced me in growth a lot in my neighborhood, and they took their football pretty seriously too. But up until that point where we were close to the same size, I played football with the boys. I played baseball. I did all that kind of. I would come home with so much dirt in my clothes that my mom wondered if there was any left outside. Yeah. Nobody ever suggested that there was anything inappropriate or shameful about my gender atypical behavior, right? But if my brother was prissy, which he was very fastidious about some things. He was very fastidious about how his hair looked, and he was very fastidious about keeping his hands clean. And, he wasn't a germaphobe or anything, but he was very tidy. My room looked like there was a tornado in it 5 minutes ago all the time. And my brother's room looked like, mom had just got done cleaning it. We cleaned our own rooms, but when there were times when mom would go through and she'd be like, all right, I want you to keep this here, I want you to keep that there and she'd give us a reason, and okay. His room always was clean, tidy. He didn't leave messes. He didn't, and we, in our house, that was normal, that was fine. But it was, if he went that way through, from just clothing, or from his environment to like clothing and everything, and was Metro before Metro existed, people would have started questioning his sexuality, or people would have started questioning his masculinity. Nobody ever questioned my femininity because I came home with mud all over my face and in my hair. Nobody ever questioned my femininity because I could win the big prize at the baseball throw where you had to knock down the bottles. But if, my brother showed up at band practice with a cake that he baked himself, which he was very good at, the guys would kind of like give him the hairy eyeball and stuff. And that's one of the things. So I think that's one of the reasons why we see more trans women than we see more than trans men, because I think more people are likely to think, well, I can't be this can't be right. I was born in the wrong body. I feel like the opposite sex. If they're in if they're living in a society where their gender has very strict roles or rules for their gender role. But now you're starting to see more political, like, I don't know if you know what political lesbianism is. Do you know what that is?
I believe so. Yeah, just lesbianism as like a statement because we are avowed misandrists, and we're going to do this to shut down contact with them. Is it
Right?
right?
It's basically, yeah, women who are not like lesbianism in and of itself is, and being gay. You know, we've learned over time that there's a small segment of the population that's their natural attraction, right? But political lesbianism is a choice.
Yeah.
And there's become this thing of political transgenderism where they're not experiencing. I've actually run into these people on Twitter. They don't have gender dysphoria. They will tell you they don't have gender dysphoria. They've just chosen to identify, I feel like the opposite sex. I'm not distressed over it, you know, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Well, that movement has started to impose transgender status on autistic girls. Autistic girls have a tendency to exhibit less feminine sensitivity toward other people at the giving end, where you give your sensitivity to other people.
Right.
They'll still have the same feminine sensitivity of, I don't know how to explain this. You still get as easily offended by other people if you pick up on their social signals.
Sure.
You might not notice when someone's being rude to you because you're not equipped to notice that they're being rude. Like, I've had people be like profoundly rude to me, and it just goes completely over my head. And then later I'll be, you know, a friend that was there with me at the situation, you know, they'll say, how did you manage to control your temper when that person said this? And I'll be like, well, they didn't, they did this. Oh no, this is what was behind it. This is what they meant, you know. And I'm like, I completely didn't catch that. I had no idea I was being attacked. But and there are girls that are much more handicapped in that, and they do end up, and this has been a trend in Canada, right? So there's that's nefarious, right? So in terms of the backlash against gynocentrism and everything, with the trans issues where trans women are engaging in women's sports and entering spaces that are strictly women's spaces and so on, and feminist women and traditionalist women are getting offended that they are there or objecting. And you know, in the sports thing, it's valid to object that somebody who went through their entire adolescence as a male is now competing against somebody who went through their entire adolescence as a female. It's fair to say that person has an advantage, because we wouldn't be dividing sports by sex if men didn't have an advantage over women. Everybody would just be competing with everybody. That's the only reason we have that division. So that it is, there's a backlash against gynocentrism, but I think in terms of the difference between what I would actually call political transgenderism versus the incredibly tiny minority of the population that actually experiences gender dysphoria and has to use what I would consider to be the duct tape of medical treatment. A sex change is like duct taping the situation, in my opinion. There have to be better ways to treat that, because it's just not a cut and dried thing that you change the body and the whole person changes. Right. So it's really managing the person's situation instead of actually curing them of their dysphoria is still there and everything, right?
Right.
That's why there's a lot of suicide there. But so when I talk about this, I'm not talking about people that go through that experience. They're not trying to insinuate themselves into anything, invade anything, force people to pay attention. They're actually just trying to live their lives with their disability, and it is a disability. But the political transgenderism, it's not just an attack. I can't call it an attack on women, because it involves both sexes of change. It's more of an attack on objective reality, if that makes sense.
I know what you're saying, yeah.
And I think gynocentrism might be a casualty of it, but gynocentrism being a casualty of it isn't enough of a benefit to tolerate the attack on objective reality. And the other thing is, there's a bit of talk about, well, if you have this attack on objective reality, men can just identify women and get the same treatment as women. But the problem with this is, in order to get that treatment, you then have to join this political movement and identify as a woman. And that's wrong. You should have the same consideration as women under law and policy and social standards and everything, regardless of how you identify. You shouldn't have to identify as a woman to be treated like a human being.
Right.
And so I have a major objection to that. In terms of the sports thing, I think that the transgender issue in sports would end immediately without any discussion or any fanfare or anything, if for a few years we just dropped the gender divide in sports altogether and nobody was excluded. Yeah. Like, everybody competed against everybody, boys against girls, men against women. It would suck for most of the women that were involved. Mm-hmm. But I think we would see a massive drop in the number of male athletes suddenly identifying as women and wanting to compete as women. And that'd be my prediction.
Right. I mean, you saw what I was getting at by the whole like dialing back of the gynocentrism thing, right? Because because one other thing is that you mentioned the traditional women and the feminist women kind of like buddying up against the transgender thing. I think all your points are well taken, but one hypocrisy I know is that those women aren't nearly as vocal as girls entering the Boy Scouts and men's spaces being more curtailed, and you get what I'm getting.
Oh yeah. So. And that's when my son was a kid. If we were in public places, because I knew that women have a habit of, if there's a line in the ladies' room, they just feel entitled to go right into the men's room, right? And then they're offended if there's a guy at the urinal. Like, that's what he's supposed to be doing in there. It's what it's there for. That's, I'm sorry that you went into a naked men's space and you saw a dick, but that's what you're going to see when you go in there, okay? They are there, right? But when he was little and he was big enough that, you can take a toddler into the ladies' room and nobody cares. You can take a 5-year-old into the ladies' room and nobody cares. The 5-year-old will be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So when he got to the age where his discomfort with going into the ladies' room was enough that I wasn't going to make him go in there, I would stay within sight of the door of the men's room, because I wasn't going to let a woman go in there if she approached it. Mm-hmm. So you stay out till my son comes out. I don't care where the line is. I don't care how long the line is. You can't go in there. That's the men's room.
Right.
And I had a couple of times where I said, hey, can you wait till my son comes out? And women would be like, all right, I don't see the big deal, and I'm like, well, what would you think if my teenage son went into the ladies' room? Oh, well, he can't do that, and it's just like, do you see why I don't want you to go in there, and this is something that women throughout their lives are blind to. Oh, it's no big deal. I'm harmless. Women are allowed to recognize ourselves as harmless when we're harmless.
Mm-hmm.
But harmless men are not allowed to do that. They have to consider the opinion of the other at all times. That person might not think I'm harmless. This is going to look creepy, even if I don't intend it that way. Women don't have to think about that in regard to themselves. And women are shocked when someone treats them that way. It's like having cold water thrown in your face.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then finding out it's rubbing alcohol and it got in your eye. Like, they're offended. And it's very strange because it's like almost like an alien concept, and it's something that I know men and boys deal with every minute of every day. How do people see me right now? Do I look threatening? Do I look scary? Do I look creepy? Do I look respectable? Do I look professional? Do I look competent? Do I look like I can win if they attack me? You know, women don't have to think about that almost ever. Women think about, you know, do I have something on my face? Am I pretty enough? You know, is my hair out of place? But most women don't think about, you know, when I'm walking through this parking lot, where are the avenues of attack that could happen if somebody wants to take my purse? And there'd be a lot less purse snatching if women thought that way. But most women don't. And most women don't think about that kind of thing till they get in that situation, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, most women don't think about, if I'm walking behind this person, are they going to be intimidated? Are they going to be worried that they have to defend themselves against me? They don't think about, if I go into the men's room, am I going to put the men in a disadvantaged position or make them uncomfortable? Are they going to feel harassed, you know, and things like that? And, you know, they might feel embarrassed themselves, but they won't think about the men's vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Men are raised to think about women's vulnerability. So our whole society, when a trans man goes into the men's room, everybody treats him as a woman who is, I guess, thinking forward, standing up for herself, and taking an initiative, you know, toughing it out, going into male territory where she's the vulnerable one, even though they're in a place where they're supposed to be allowed to be naked.
Mm-hmm.
But when a trans woman walks into the women's room, they think of her as a creepy man going in where women are supposed to be allowed to be naked, and carrying a penis into a room that's only supposed to have female genitalia. And it's that social attitude makes it very difficult. I think it makes it very difficult for the non-political, the real gender dysphoria experiencing trans women, especially if they don't pass and they've had the bottom surgery and they have to sit down to pee. Mm-hmm. You go into a man's restroom and you sit down to pee and you're in a female outfit. You know, you might feel like a weirdo in there, and you never know when there's going to be a guy that's going to be offended by you, and you're in a isolated space. But if you go into a woman's restroom, you never know when there's a woman that's going to accuse you of being creepy and dangerous to her. And then you have to contend with the fact that there are political trans women who might be, and there are criminals who will take advantage of this as well. And there have been instances where there have been men who are not trans, but who have pretended to be trans so they can go into women's locker rooms and women's restrooms and stuff like that because they have an illness, you know, that makes them predatory, and they need help with that, and they can't get it because now we have this political transgenderism that is used as an enabler for them. And, you know, it'd be like if somebody came along and said, no, you can't treat the heroin addict. That's a lifestyle choice, and you can't have rehab. Rehab is bad. You have to let them die. You know, Right. And at the same time, you know, hey, if just because, you know, they might beat some people up and steal their stuff and, you know, vomit on your doorstop and so, you can't kick them out of your neighborhood. they can't help it. They're a heroin addict, right? And it's the same thing with the tiny minority of men who do predatory things and figure out, hey, if I just use trans status, I can go into the women's room. If you can't treat them, and and you can't treat them as the people they are. You have to treat them as a political issue. You can't protect the little girls that might be in that bathroom, that are not even adult enough to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with if women have the guts to be, most women, when they're pedophiles like that, they do it in a covert situation, very covert situation. They hide it as best they can, or they do it in the classroom. So you won't see them maybe necessarily trying to use a restroom that way.
Right.
But you wouldn't be able to protect the little boys in that restroom if they did, if they were able to use transgenderism.
Right. I was about to say, because female predators do exist and male victims do exist. So, we're turning all the attention one way, but not the other.
Yeah.
So, right. That's one concern I have.
Yeah, and we hear all the time about the ones that will go into the women's room, and I do recognize that there are differences in styles of perpetration between men and women, because
sure.
The thrill seeking that men, that's more natural to men, means that they're going to be the risk taking of getting caught and all that is going to be more of a thing with male perpetrators, whereas female perpetrators are going to be sneakier. They're going to take less risk getting caught, and then they're going to try to talk their way out of it by pretending that what they did was harmless.
Right.
And people will buy it.
Yeah, they've already got that bonus of not having what they've done considered to be rape or assault.
Right.
Most of the cases. So.
Yeah, having people hear the victim's story and respond with "nice," like, jeez.
Right. Oh yeah. I've heard people kind of, again with the hypocrisy. It's like, it's grooming if the gays and the trans do it, but when a straight woman does that to an actual boy, it's this should be celebrated. That's the kind of thing I see all the time.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, and it's really disgusting because, you people don't consider the chemical effects of human intimacy, right? And what happens in the brain, and what age you're prepared for that to happen at, and so on. So it's not harmless like a pat on the head, or a ride in the car, or and things like, even if the kid is old enough that they're in their adolescence and their body is starting to get them ready for these things, they're still psychologically ill-equipped to deal with what happens in their brain when they develop the level of brain chemistry that happens in a intimate relationship, and then it's broken off. And they don't have a way of dealing with that. And it's even worse I think it's even worse for boys, because they're not expected to have that. Everybody recognizes that you can break a girl's heart. You can just shatter it and she's devastated. But people treat boys like, they can be sad and heartbroken and mope around after a relationship, but nobody realizes just how much you can rip a guy's heart out. And it's something that's lacking, I think, in our sex education. We teach about biology, we teach about birth control, we teach about STDs, but we don't teach the students that when they engage in a sex act with another person, that their level of oxytocin changes, and that their dopamine changes, that their serotonin changes, and that these changes can cause the masculine side of the relationship, whether it's the butch lesbian or a man in the relationship, to become very protective of the feminine side and very dedicated, even if it's not like marital dedication. And as soon as you rip that apart, when she withdraws her attention and her affections, like I've seen guys go from just having a normal day to wanting to throw themselves in front of a truck and thinking they're never going to recover. And it's not just people treat it like it's melodrama, but it's not just melodrama. They're completely emotionally drained in the space of a few minutes because a girl broke up with them. And the reason, because they had developed that level of attachment and dedication and love and care, and their brain chemistry had changed, like completely and utterly changed. And now they're being asked to ignore those changes. Mm-hmm. And they don't have the same social support from overall society. Their buddies don't know how to handle it. They haven't been told what's happening to them, and they're just kind of screwed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the way I process the lack of sex education, lack of that component in sex education, is that I think the realm of emotions kind of falls under what they would call more prurient interests and more of a lust context, I think. So I think there's a bit of a sanctimony involved in how they withhold this aspect, And again, we're going into that over clinical, rather detached kind of way of treating the whole sex education thing. I think this whole, you mentioned the biology and the functions and the details and everything like that, but not that erotic aspect of it, because now we're entering into the realms of sin, and nowadays we'd call it misogyny if a man lusts after a woman, of course.
Right. Which yes, you love this woman so much you hate her, and fear her, Mm-hmm. But when you think about it, a broken heart from the loss of a relationship that had become sexual is as much a sex injury as genital warts or cancer from HPV is a sex injury, or herpes is a sex injury, or I can't remember what it's called. There are actual physical injuries that happen from rough sex. That like vascular injuries to the guy or tears to the woman. Mm-hmm. I would say these things are all comparable and addressable in a clinical manner, and the emotional aspect of it, because the brain chemistry involved, it's something that I think would make a difference in the suicide rate, the teenage suicide rate, the teenage pregnancy rate, high school bullying, and the rate of STDs. And I think most people by the age of 15 are capable of understanding the subject matter. If they were given that information and time was dedicated to helping them understand that information, process it, and apply it in their own lives, so they know, all right, I'm out on a date with this really hot person that I really, really like, but if we take the step from kissing and all this other stuff to actually having sex, then we're stepping into this territory where we're at risk of this type of injury as well. And so it becomes, it doesn't necessarily mean that the student is going to suddenly decide on abstinence, but they're going to make that decision with a better understanding of the gravity of the decision that they're making.
Yeah.
And you might see students being more conservative with how frequently or how lightly they make that decision. And with whom, do I really want to be this attached to that person? Do I want to risk, I'm not this attached to that person. Do I want to risk making them this attached to me? I really like them. Do I want to risk putting them through that pain? And back and forth. Do I want this to happen to me? Do I want this to happen to them? And they don't get the opportunity to make those considerations at part of the decision-making process for that. Right? And so I think that's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's quite a bit to think about in light of, the fact that I think most boys kind of have this feeling that, it's now or never with this relationship. So
Yeah.
they get really anxious about the idea of pair bonding with somebody. In a way that someone that young might actually partake in, and the heartbreak becomes tremendous because they're kind of feeling like what's the animal that's mated for life? Swans, is it?
Wolves. I think
Wolves.
swans.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But using those as an example, they kind of feel themselves like I'll never fall in love again, and something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we make fun of it, but like you say, the implications might be worse than we give credit. Give
Yeah.
credit to. Yeah.
It's a very deep, profound, all-encompassing experience, and it becomes a very difficult thing. I've the guys I've hung out with all my life, I've noticed one of the really hard things for them. They have a relationship, and then the relationship is over, and then the girl goes through a rough time in regard to something else. She, falls down and gets hurt, or she gets a bad grade, and she's obviously depressed and despondent. And there's a wall there now. He can't be the person she leans on. He can't be the comfort. He can't be the protector because she's not part of his relationship unit anymore. And you do become kind of a relationship unit between two people and not just two individual people at that point. And you can see them sort of, there's a chest lean that starts forward, and then they hold themselves back because, that's not our relationship anymore. I'm not the shoulder she cries on or the arm that protects her anymore. I'm just some guy. And then they deflate all over again. And it can be days or weeks or months. It can be after it looked like they fully recovered. And it's, it's something that, my mom kind of warned me about that when I was a kid, when I was young enough that I wasn't in relationships like that yet. She was like, if you let a guy get that attached to you, if you sleep with a guy, you're forming an attachment that if you break up with him later, it's going to be really hard. Everything that you experience is still going to be hard on him until he processes that, and it can take years. And it wasn't something that ever would have occurred to me if she hadn't said it. And I don't think most girls get told that.